I stood frozen in my own kitchen doorway, watching my son Marcus hand his wife Jennifer a stack of legal documents while they sat at my dining table, laughing about how easy it had been to forge my signature on the power of attorney forms. "From now on, your paycheck goes straight to my account," Marcus said, not even looking up from his coffee. "You're too old to manage money anyway, Mom. This is for your own good." I couldn't speak. My hands trembled against the doorframe. The teacup I'd been holding slipped from my fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, but neither of them even flinched. They'd been expecting me to walk in. They wanted me to see this. "I need you to stay with me through every moment of what happened next. If you're here, if you're listening, please tap that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from. I want to know how far my voice has reached. How many people understand what it feels like to be betrayed by the ones you sacrificed everything for?" My name is Angelina Johns. I'm 72 years old, and until 3 months ago, I believed I had raised a decent man. I'm a retired elementary school teacher from Portland, Oregon, living in the same modest two-story house where I raised Marcus alone after his father died of cancer when he was only 8 years old. For 15 years, I worked double shifts. I sold my mother's jewelry to pay for Marcus's college education. I postponed my own medical treatments to afford his wedding. I gave him the down payment for his first house. I never remarried, never dated, never took a single vacation. Every dollar, every dream, every sacrifice was for him. 6 months ago, everything changed when Marcus married Jennifer, a woman 15 years younger, with expensive tastes and a family history I should have investigated more carefully. She moved into my home temporarily while they saved for renovations, and within weeks, I noticed small things disappearing. My late mother's silver candlesticks, my husband's watch collection, cash from my emergency envelope in the kitchen drawer. When I confronted Marcus privately, he dismissed my concerns with a cold laugh I'd never heard before. "You're getting paranoid in your old age, Mom. Maybe it's time we talked about your living situation." That conversation happened 4 weeks before the kitchen scene. Now standing in the shattered remains of my teacup, I understood exactly what he meant by living situation. They weren't just taking control of my finances. They were planning to take everything. I silently retreated to my bedroom, while Marcus and Jennifer's laughter echoed through the house I've lived in for 43 years. Jennifer's voice carried up the stairs. "Did you see her face? This is going to be easier than we thought." That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my bedroom desk with a notepad and began documenting everything, every conversation I could remember, every missing item, every strange bank statement I'd noticed but dismissed as confusion. I'd been seeing red flags for months, but had convinced myself I was being paranoid or overly suspicious. Marcus had started asking invasive questions about my retirement accounts, my late husband's life insurance policy, and the house deed. Jennifer had been photographing rooms in my house, claiming she was getting decorating ideas. I found a folder hidden in the guest room closet, where they'd been staying, containing photocopies of my personal documents: Social Security card, bank statements, insurance policies, even my late husband's death certificate. There were handwritten notes in Jennifer's writing, calculating the house's market value and my monthly pension amount. Specific moments of manipulation replayed in my mind. Marcus suggesting I was too stressed to handle my own bills. Jennifer offering to help organize my important papers. Both of them encouraging me to stay home instead of attending my weekly book club or visiting my sister. I realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't impulsive greed. This was a calculated plan they'd been executing for months, possibly since before the wedding. The forged power of attorney was just the final step. I made a decision that night. I wouldn't confront them again. I wouldn't cry or beg or try to appeal to the son I thought I knew. Instead, I would become invisible, compliant, and seemingly defeated, while I figured out exactly how deep this betrayal went. "Let them think they've won," I whispered to my reflection in the dark bedroom window. "Let them think I'm just a foolish old woman who doesn't understand what's happening." The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I shuffled into the kitchen, wearing my oldest bathrobe, made weak coffee with shaking hands, and avoided eye contact when Marcus handed me a single-page document to sign, a simplified household budget that gave him complete control over my checking account. "Just sign here, Mom," he said with manufactured patience. "This makes everything easier for both of us." I signed with a trembling hand, misspelling my own name slightly, a detail I knew might matter later. Jennifer watched from the doorway with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 3 hours later, I was sitting in the office of Patricia Moreno, a family law attorney whose name I'd found through my sister Clara. Patricia was in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and an expression that had seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked one question: "Angelina, do you want your son to face consequences, or do you just want your life back?" The mother in me still remembered Marcus as a little boy holding my hand on his first day of school. But I'd also just watched that same child plot to steal everything I'd worked for. Patricia didn't rush me. She simply waited. "Finally," I answered. "I want both. I want my life back, and I want him to understand what he's done." Patricia nodded and began outlining a strategy. First, we'd document everything, get copies of the forged power of attorney, track any financial transactions they'd already made, gather evidence of their planning. Second, we'd use their confidence against them by letting them continue their scheme while we built an airtight case. Third, we'd wait for them to make a mistake big enough to be undeniable. "The hardest part," Patricia warned, "will be pretending nothing has changed. Can you go home and act like a victim while we prepare?" I thought about 40 years of teaching patience to children, of hiding my exhaustion during double shifts, of smiling through grief at my husband's funeral, because Marcus needed me to be strong. "I've been pretending my whole life," I told her. "I can pretend a little longer." I left Patricia's office with a small recording device hidden in my purse and a plan that required me to become someone I'd never been before, a spy in my own home. Are you still with me? Because what happens next is when everything changed. If you're invested in this story, show me by leaving a comment. Tell me, have you ever had to pretend everything was fine while your heart was breaking? I read every single comment, and your stories give me strength. I became the perfect victim. Every morning, I shuffled around the house in worn slippers, misplacing my reading glasses, asking Marcus to explain simple things I understood perfectly. I let Jennifer rearrange my kitchen cabinets and donate my clothes to charity without protest. I nodded along when they discussed memory care facilities at dinner, as if I couldn't hear the excitement in their voices. But every night, after they thought I was asleep, I was documenting everything. The recording device Patricia gave me captured conversations they had in the living room below my bedroom, discussions about selling my house, accessing my retirement accounts, even speculation about how long I'd last before they could claim my life insurance. Jennifer's voice, casual and cold. "Once we get the house in our name, we can flip it within 6 months. The neighborhood's gentrifying fast." Marcus responding, "What about her? We can't just kick her out immediately." Jennifer laughing, "Marcus, she's 72 and showing signs of dementia. Nobody will question putting her in a state facility. She won't even remember this house after a few months." I lay in my bed, listening to my son discuss my future like I was already dead, fighting the urge to storm downstairs and scream at them. But Patricia's words echoed in my mind. Let them feel safe. Safe people make mistakes. I began secretly reaching out to people who could verify my mental competence. My doctor of 20 years, my book club friends, my former principal at the elementary school. I asked each of them to write dated letters, confirming my cognitive function, my memory, my ability to manage complex tasks. I framed it as updating my records, and nobody questioned it. I also discovered that Jennifer had a history I hadn't known about: 2 previous marriages to older men, both of whom had mysteriously signed over significant assets before the marriages ended. One had filed a police report for financial elder abuse that was dropped when he died suddenly of a heart attack. The other was living in a nursing home, estranged from his own children who blamed his ex-wife for his poverty. This research came from my sister Clara, who'd hired a private investigator without telling me. When she showed me the file, I felt sick, not just because of what Jennifer had done to others, but because I'd been so desperate for Marcus to be happy that I'd ignored every warning sign. I overheard Marcus on the phone with someone, saying, It's almost done. Another month, and we'll have everything transferred. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's too far gone to even understand what's happening. I closed my eyes and thought, let them believe that. Let them think I'm disappearing into confusion and old age, because when the truth comes out, the fall will be so much harder. The confrontation I'd been avoiding finally came when my sister Clara visited for Sunday dinner. Marcus had tried to discourage the visit, claiming I was having a bad week and might be confused or emotional, but Clara insisted. She arrived with flowers and immediately noticed something I'd been pretending not to see. My mother's emerald ring was missing from my hand. I'd worn that ring every single day for 30 years since my mother's death. It was the one piece of jewelry I'd sworn never to remove. Angelina, where's Mom's ring? Clara asked, her voice sharp with concern. I played my part, touching my bare finger with manufactured confusion. Oh, I must have misplaced it. These days, I can't seem to keep track of anything. Jennifer jumped in smoothly. We've been looking everywhere for it. Clara, Angelina's been so forgetful lately. We're worried she might have accidentally thrown it away or left it somewhere. But Clara wasn't fooled. Her eyes moved from Jennifer's face to Marcus's, then to the new designer handbag sitting on the counter, a bag that cost more than my monthly pension. That's interesting, Clara said slowly, because Mom's ring was appraised at $45,000 last year. I have the documentation. The temperature in the room dropped. Marcus's face flushed red. What are you implying, Aunt Clara? I'm not implying anything, Clara responded, her voice steady. I'm stating a fact. That ring doesn't just disappear, and neither do silver candlesticks, or vintage watches, or the cash Angelina kept in her emergency envelope. Jennifer's mask slipped for just a moment. A flash of anger crossed her face before she recovered. This is insulting. We've been taking care of Angelina, and you're accusing us of theft? The tension in that moment was suffocating. Clara standing firm, Jennifer and Marcus exchanging glances, and me sitting at my own dining table, pretending to be confused while my heart raced. This was dangerous. If Clara pushed too hard now, Marcus and Jennifer might accelerate their plans before Patricia and I were ready. I interrupted with a shaky voice. Clara, please. I'm sure the ring is here somewhere. Maybe I put it in a drawer and forgot. Marcus and Jennifer have been wonderful to me. Clara's eyes met mine, and I saw the question there, what are you doing? But she was smart enough to read the tiny shake of my head, the pleading look I hoped only she could see. She backed down, but not before delivering one final warning. I'm sure it will turn up. But Angelina, I think it's time we went through your valuables together and made sure everything is properly documented and secured. For insurance purposes. Marcus forced a smile. That's a great idea. We should definitely do that. But I saw his hand tighten around his fork. Saw Jennifer's jaw clench. They knew Clara was a threat now. After Clara left, the atmosphere in the house changed. Marcus and Jennifer were more careful around me, speaking in whispers, watching me more closely. That night, I heard them arguing in their room. Jennifer's voice, harsh and urgent. Your aunt is going to ruin everything. We need to move faster. Marcus, we can't rush this. If we make it too obvious. Jennifer, she's already suspicious. And that old woman isn't as confused as she's pretending to be. I've seen her watching us. A long pause. Then Marcus, quieter. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to be smarter. There are ways to handle nosy relatives and inconvenient old women. I've done this before, remember? The recording device captured every word. The next morning, I made copies of everything and delivered them to Patricia's office in a sealed envelope. In my note, I wrote, if anything happens to me or my sister, make sure the police get these recordings. I realized that I wasn't just fighting for my money or my house anymore. I was fighting for my life. 3 days after Clara's visit, I started feeling strange. Dizzy spells that came without warning, confusion that felt different from anything I'd experienced before, and an overwhelming fatigue that made it hard to get out of bed. Jennifer was suddenly very attentive, bringing me tea every morning and evening, insisting I take my vitamins with every meal. Marcus watched these interactions with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it guilt or anticipation? I initially thought I was genuinely becoming ill. that perhaps the stress of the situation was manifesting physically. But then I remembered Jennifer's words on the recording. There are ways to handle inconvenient old women. One morning, when Jennifer brought me my tea and vitamin pills, I pretended to take them while actually palming the pills and hiding them in my bathrobe pocket. The tea I poured into a plant when she left the room. Within hours, my head began to clear. The dizziness faded. The confusion lifted like fog burning off in sunlight. That's when I knew they were drugging me. The cold terror of that realization washed over me. My own son was participating in slowly incapacitating me, making me appear mentally incompetent so they could more easily take control of my life. But alongside the fear came something else. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage that burned away any remaining doubt about what I needed to do. I started collecting the pills instead of taking them, storing them in a small bag hidden in my bedroom. I continued to pretend the drugs were working, stumbling occasionally, losing my train of thought mid-sentence, asking the same questions repeatedly. But now I was documenting everything with clear eyes and a focused mind. I also began researching the pills themselves, using my sister's computer during a secret visit to her house. I discovered they were a combination of anti-anxiety medication and a sedative. Nothing immediately dangerous, but in the doses they were giving me, enough to cause genuine cognitive impairment over time. Marcus's old friend David stopped by unexpectedly. David had been like family to us for years, present at every birthday and holiday. When he saw me, concern crossed his face. "Angelina, are you feeling all right? You seem different." Before I could answer, Jennifer intervened smoothly. "She's been having some health issues lately, David. We're taking good care of her, but the doctor says it's normal aging." David's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which doctor?" "Because I ran into Dr. Harrison last week, and he mentioned he hasn't seen Angelina in months." The tension spiked. Marcus jumped in. "We've been taking her to a specialist, someone more experienced with geriatric patients." "Really?" David's voice was skeptical. "What's the specialist's name? I'd like to recommend him to my mother." Jennifer and Marcus exchanged glances. They didn't have an answer because there is no specialist. They'd been keeping me isolated, preventing me from seeing my regular doctor, who would immediately recognize that something was wrong. David didn't push further, but as he was leaving, he caught my eye for just a moment. I saw the question there, the concern, the suspicion, and I made a split-second decision. I gave him the tiniest nod, hoping he understood. "Help me." I sat alone in my room that night, holding the bag of pills I'd collected, evidence of attempted incapacitation. I called Patricia from a burner phone, my sister bought me, and told her everything. Her response was immediate. "We're moving up the timeline. This has gone beyond financial abuse. They're physically endangering you. Are you safe tonight?" I looked at my bedroom door, at the lock that doesn't work because Marcus removed it months ago, claiming he was worried about me falling and not being able to get help. "I don't know," I whispered. "But I'm not leaving my house. This is my home, and I won't let them chase me out of it." David became my first unexpected ally. 2 days after his visit, he returned when Marcus and Jennifer were out, claiming he'd forgotten his phone. But as soon as we were alone, his demeanor changed completely. "Angelina, I need you to be honest with me. Are they hurting you?" I had a moment of decision. I could continue pretending, or I could trust someone who'd known me for 25 years. I chose trust. I told him everything, not just about the financial manipulation, but about the drugs, the isolation, the recordings, Patricia's investigation. David listened with growing horror, his hands clenched into fists. "That son of a—" He stopped himself. "I'm sorry, Angelina. I know he's your son, but what they're doing is criminal." "I know," I said quietly. "And they're going to pay for it, but I need help, David. I need people who can witness what's happening, who can testify if necessary." David didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need." Over the next week, David helped me build a network of allies without Marcus and Jennifer's knowledge. He coordinated with Clara, with my doctor, with my book club friends. Each person was given a specific role in documenting my mental competence and the suspicious changes in my life. My doctor, Dr. Harrison, was particularly helpful. When I finally managed to see him, claiming I had a dentist appointment, he conducted a full cognitive assessment and was shocked by what I told him about the medication. Angelina, this is serious. If they're administering drugs without your consent, that's assault, and the combination they're giving you, prolonged use, could cause real damage. He documented everything in my medical file, including photographs of the pills I'd collected and detailed notes about my symptoms when I was taking them versus when I stopped. He also wrote a formal letter stating that I was of sound mind and fully capable of managing my own affairs, a letter that would become crucial evidence later. I discovered Jennifer's past in more detail through David's connections. He knew a retired police detective who pulled records on her previous marriages. The pattern was clear and chilling. She targeted older men with assets, isolated them from family, gained financial control, and then either divorced them after draining their accounts, or in 2 cases, they died under suspicious circumstances that were never fully investigated. She's done this before, David said, showing me the file, and she's gotten away with it because these men were too ashamed to report it, or too confused to understand what was happening, or they died before they could. I felt sick reading through the documents, seeing the names of men who'd been victimized, the same way I was being victimized. But I also felt something else. Determination. This ended with me. Jennifer wouldn't get away with it again. I met secretly with my entire ally network: Clara, David, Dr. Harrison, Patricia, and 3 friends from my book club. We gathered at Clara's house while Marcus and Jennifer thought I was at a doctor's appointment. Patricia laid out the complete plan. We have enough evidence now to file criminal charges for financial elder abuse, fraud, and attempted incapacitation. But Angelina has requested something specific for the confrontation. She wants them to confess publicly in front of witnesses, so there's no possibility of them claiming innocence or blaming each other. Everyone looked at me. I took a breath and explained, I'm hosting a family dinner next week. I'm going to invite everyone, Marcus's godparents, my cousins David, all of you. I'm going to announce that I'm updating my will and want everyone there to witness it. Marcus and Jennifer will think this is their victory moment, that I'm officially signing everything over to them. But instead, they're going to hear the truth, and everyone they've been lying to will hear it too. Clara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Are you sure, Angelina? This will destroy Marcus. There's no coming back from this. I thought about my son listening to his wife discuss putting me in a state facility. I thought about the pills that could have caused permanent damage. I thought about the other men Jennifer had destroyed. He destroyed himself, I said quietly. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. I announced the dinner with perfect timing. During breakfast, when Marcus and Jennifer were both present and relaxed, confident in their control over my life. I've been thinking, I said in my frail, confused voice. I want to have a family dinner next Sunday. A proper gathering with everyone who matters to me. I need to discuss some important decisions about my future, and I want you all there to support me. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances. I could see the calculation in their eyes. This was it, the moment they'd been working toward. They thought I was going to formally sign over my assets in front of witnesses, making it harder to contest later. That's a wonderful idea, Mom, Marcus said, his voice warm with false affection. Who should we invite? I listed names carefully. Marcus's godparents, Thomas and Ruth, my cousins Margaret and James, David, my book club friends Linda and Susan, and of course Clara. Each person on the list was part of my ally network, though Marcus and Jennifer didn't know that. That's quite a crowd, Jennifer said, trying to hide her excitement. What's the occasion? I want to update my will, I said simply. And I want everyone to understand my wishes. At my age, these things are important. Marcus practically glowed with anticipation. Jennifer's hand found his under the table, squeezing it in triumph. They thought they'd won. They thought this dinner would be their coronation as my heirs and caretakers. We'll help you prepare, Mom, Marcus said. Whatever you need. Over the next week, I watched them transform. Suddenly they were attentive and kind, helping me plan the menu, offering to clean the house, even suggesting I should wear my nice dress for the occasion. Jennifer went shopping for expensive wine and flowers, spending my money freely because she believed it would all be hers soon anyway. But while they prepared for their victory, I was preparing something else entirely. Patricia had drawn up documents, not the will Marcus expected, but rather a comprehensive presentation of evidence, including financial records, recordings, medical reports, and witness statements. I met with Clara to practice my speech, reviewing the evidence with Patricia one final time, even rehearsing with Dr. Harrison what he would say when called upon to testify to my mental competence. "Are you ready for this?" Patricia asked during our final meeting. "Once you start, there's no stopping. Everything will come out." I thought about the little boy Marcus had been, the one who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. I thought about the man he'd become, the one who discussed selling my house while I slept upstairs. They weren't the same person. Maybe they never had been. "I'm ready," I said. "I've been ready for a long time." The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house in the darkness, touching familiar objects, the banister my husband had refinished by hand, the kitchen table where I'd helped Marcus with homework for 12 years, the living room where we'd celebrated every Christmas and birthday. This was my home, my life, my history, and tomorrow I was going to fight for it in front of everyone who mattered. I heard a noise and froze. Jennifer was downstairs talking on her phone in a harsh whisper. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. "Tomorrow's the day." I know. Be patient. Once she signs, we move fast. The house goes on the market immediately, and she goes into whatever facility will take her. No, Marcus won't be a problem. He's weak. He'll do whatever I say. Yes, just like the last time. Easier, actually, because she's already isolated. The recording device in my pocket captured every word. I smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, Jennifer would learn that I was anything but isolated. Dawn broke on the day of the dinner. I dressed carefully in my best clothes, put on my mother's pearls. I'd found them hidden in Jennifer's jewelry box, and reclaimed them silently, and looked at myself in the mirror. Today I whispered to my reflection, "Everything changes." The guests began arriving at 5 o'clock. I greeted each one at the door, playing my role perfectly, the slightly confused elderly woman, grateful for everyone's presence, a little overwhelmed by the crowd. But as each ally arrived, they gave me subtle signals of support. Clara squeezed my hand. David nodded almost imperceptibly. Dr. Harrison caught my eye and mouthed, "You've got this." Marcus and Jennifer played the perfect caregivers, ushering people in, offering drinks, explaining to everyone how difficult things had been lately with my declining health. I watched Jennifer work the room, her performance flawless, the concerned daughter-in-law, so devoted, so patient with her confused mother-in-law. Thomas, Marcus's godfather, pulled him aside. I was close enough to hear, "Your mother seems well tonight, Marcus. Better than you described on the phone last week." Marcus's smile tightened. "She has good days and bad days. Today's a good day." But Thomas's expression remained skeptical. He'd known me for 30 years, had been my late husband's best friend. He wasn't easily fooled. The dinner itself was surreal. We sat around my dining table, the same table where Marcus had announced he was taking control of my finances, the same table where I'd served thousands of family meals over the decades. The conversation flowed superficially. Weather, neighborhood news, memories of better times. Jennifer kept checking her watch. She wanted to move things along, to get to the moment when I would supposedly sign my life away. Marcus was nervous, barely touching his food, his leg bouncing under the table. Finally, as dessert was being served, Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, should we discuss why you wanted everyone here tonight?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me. This was the moment. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. "Yes," I said, and my voice was suddenly stronger, clearer than it had been in weeks. Several people noticed the change immediately. I did want to discuss my will and my future. But first, I need to tell you all something important. Jennifer leaned forward, eager. Marcus's hand found hers on the table. "I'm not updating my will tonight," I continued, watching their faces change. "Instead, I'm here to expose a crime that's been committed against me in this house, by people I trusted with my life." The confusion in the room was palpable. Marcus's face went pale. Jennifer's hand tightened on his. "Mom, what are you?" Marcus started. "I'm talking about fraud, Marcus." financial elder abuse, forgery, and attempted incapacitation through forced medication. The room erupted. Jennifer stood up so fast her chair fell backward. This is insane. She's confused. Everyone can see. Sit down, Jennifer. Patricia's voice cut through the chaos. She'd been sitting quietly at the end of the table, and now she stood, pulling out a folder thick with documents. I'm Patricia Moreno, Mrs. Johns's attorney, and everything she's saying is documented, recorded, and verified. The next hour unfolded in vivid detail. Patricia presented evidence piece by piece, while Marcus and Jennifer tried to defend themselves, their stories contradicting each other, their panic growing, the forged power of attorney documents, the recordings of their private conversations, the pills I'd collected, Dr. Harrison's testimony about my perfect cognitive function, and the effects of the unauthorized medication. David spoke up. I witnessed Marcus telling people his mother was incompetent when she clearly wasn't. I heard Jennifer discussing handling Angelina like she'd done before. Clara added, I documented missing valuables, including our mother's emerald ring, which I later found being sold online by Jennifer under a fake name. Each ally provided their piece of the puzzle. Thomas and Ruth confirmed that Marcus had been asking them about my finances and spreading rumors about my mental decline. My book club friends testified that I'd been systematically isolated from them, with Marcus making excuses for my absence. Jennifer finally broke. This is a setup. You're all conspiring against us because you're jealous that Marcus is the favorite, that he's the one taking care of her. Taking care of me? I stood up, my voice steady and strong. You've been drugging me, Jennifer. You've been stealing from me. You've been planning to institutionalize me in a state facility while you sold my house and spent my money. And Marcus, my voice broke slightly. My son has been helping you do it. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. His hands trembled on the table. Mom, it wasn't supposed to go this far. Jennifer said we were just protecting you, that you needed help managing things. Don't you dare blame me. Jennifer turned on him viciously. You were the one who wanted the money. You were the one who said she was too old to need this big house. I just helped you get what you wanted. And there it was. The confession delivered in front of a room full of witnesses, recorded on multiple devices. They'd turned on each other, exactly as Patricia predicted they would. A knock came at the door. Patricia walked over and opened it to reveal two police officers. Mrs. Johns, the senior officer said, we've been coordinating with your attorney. Based on the evidence presented, we have warrants for the arrest of Marcus Johns and Jennifer Johns for financial elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and assault. Jennifer lunged toward the back door, but David was already there, blocking her exit. Marcus just sat at the table, his head in his hands, as the officers approached with handcuffs. Mom, he whispered as they pulled him to his feet. Mom, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. You meant every bit of it, I said quietly. You just didn't mean to get caught. The house felt different after they left. The guests had departed slowly, each person stopping to hug me, to tell me how brave I was, to express their shock and support. Thomas had tears in his eyes when he apologized for not seeing the signs sooner. Clara stayed the longest, helping me clean up the dinner dishes in silence. How do you feel? She finally asked. I didn't know how to answer. I felt hollow and relieved and heartbroken all at once. I feel free, I said eventually. And I feel like I've lost my son. You lost him a long time ago, Clara said gently. Tonight you just stopped pretending you hadn't. The complex emotions of the following weeks washed over me in waves. Marcus and Jennifer were both charged with multiple felonies. Jennifer's past came to light during the investigation, revealing the full extent of her previous schemes. Two other families came forward with similar stories, and suddenly, what had seemed like an isolated incident became a pattern of predatory behavior spanning years. Marcus tried to reach out from jail, letters full of apologies and excuses. He blamed Jennifer for everything, claimed he'd been manipulated, said he'd never meant to hurt me. I read each letter once, and then filed them away without responding. Patricia advised me not to have any contact during the trial preparation. But the hardest part wasn't Marcus's betrayal. I'd already processed that. The hardest part was the whispers in the community, the way some people looked at me with pity, the questions about how I didn't know what was happening in my own home. One day at the grocery store, a woman I barely knew approached me. "I heard about your son," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It must be so difficult, having family turn on you like that. Makes you wonder if you did something wrong raising him." I looked at her for a long moment, then said clearly, "I raised a good boy who became a bad man. That's his choice and his responsibility, not mine. And I'm not the victim here anymore. I'm the woman who stopped him." Dr. Harrison conducted a final assessment to document my complete recovery from the effects of the medication. "You're remarkable, Angelina," he said. "Most people in your situation would have been destroyed by this. Instead, you fought back." "I'm a teacher," I reminded him. "I've dealt with bullies before. I just never thought I'd have to teach that lesson to my own son." I went through the process of reclaiming my home, changing all the locks, going through every room to inventory what had been taken, repainting the bedroom where Marcus and Jennifer had stayed to erase their presence. Clara helped me burn the bedding they'd used, a symbolic purging that felt necessary. David helped me install a new security system and update all my financial accounts. "You know," he said one afternoon while we were working, "your husband would be proud of how you handled this. He always said you were the strongest person he knew." That made me cry. The first real tears I'd shed since the dinner, not for Marcus, but for my late husband who'd loved our son so much, who died believing Marcus would take care of me. I was grateful he hadn't lived to see this betrayal. One evening, I sat in my living room, looking at old photo albums, pictures of Marcus as a baby, as a child, as a young man at his college graduation. I tried to find the moment when things changed, when greed replaced love, when he stopped being my son and became someone I didn't recognize. But maybe there was no single moment. Maybe it had been gradual, a slow erosion of values I thought I'd taught him, or maybe he'd always had this capacity for selfishness, and I'd been too close to see it. I closed the album and put it away in a box in the attic. I wasn't ready to throw away those memories, but I didn't need to look at them anymore either. "Tomorrow," I said to the empty room, "I start over." The trial began on a cold morning in November, 6 months after the dinner that changed everything. I sat in the courtroom with Clara on one side and Patricia on the other, watching as Marcus and Jennifer were led in separately. They'd been denied bail after Jennifer attempted to flee the state. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented the forged power of attorney documents, the recordings of Marcus and Jennifer's private conversations, the evidence of the medication scheme, and testimony from multiple witnesses. The jury listened with growing horror as the full scope of the abuse was revealed. I had to testify. Walking to the witness stand, I felt every one of my 72 years, but I kept my back straight and my voice steady. The prosecutor asked me to describe what had happened, and I told the truth simply and clearly. When it was the defense attorney's turn to cross-examine me, he tried to paint me as a vindictive mother, angry at her son's marriage, exaggerating normal family conflicts into criminal behavior. "Mrs. Johns, isn't it true that you disapproved of your son's marriage to Jennifer?" "I had concerns," I answered carefully. "But I wanted Marcus to be happy. I welcomed Jennifer into my home." "And isn't it true that you've always been controlling with your son, that this is really about you losing power over his life?" I looked directly at the jury. "I worked 2 jobs for 15 years to give my son opportunities. I never had. I paid for his education, his wedding, his first house down payment. I never asked for gratitude or control. I just wanted him to be a decent person. The only thing I'm trying to control now is my own life, which he tried to steal from me." The defense attorney moved on quickly. Jennifer's testimony was a disaster for the defense. She tried to play the victim, claiming Marcus had coerced her into everything, but the prosecutor presented evidence of her previous schemes with other elderly men. When confronted with the recordings of her own words, discussing how to handle me, bragging about how easy I was to manipulate, she broke down and started screaming at Marcus, blaming him for being too weak to finish what they'd started. Marcus's testimony was quieter, but equally damning. He admitted to forging my signature, to controlling my finances, to knowing about the medication. His defense was that he'd been trying to protect me from myself, that he genuinely believed I was becoming incompetent. But when the prosecutor played the recording of Marcus laughing with Jennifer about selling my house and putting me in a state facility, his defense crumbled. The jury could hear the callousness in his voice, the complete absence of love or concern. "Did that sound like protection, Mr. Johns?" the prosecutor asked. "Or did it sound like greed?" Marcus had no answer. The closing arguments painted a clear picture, the prosecution showing elder abuse and predatory behavior, the defense grasping at straws, trying to create reasonable doubt that didn't exist. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, I held Clara's hand tightly. The four women stood and read the verdicts, guilty on all counts for both Marcus and Jennifer. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Jennifer started sobbing. Marcus just stared straight ahead, his face blank. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, but she had words for both defendants before they were taken away. "This court has seen many forms of abuse," she said, her voice stern, "but there's something particularly cruel about adult children who prey on their elderly parents. Mrs. Johns trusted you, Mr. Johns. She sacrificed everything to give you a decent life. And you repaid her by trying to steal not just her money, but her dignity, her autonomy, and her health. As for you, Miss Johns, you are a predator who has made a career of targeting vulnerable elderly people. This court will ensure you never have that opportunity again." I left the courthouse, surrounded by my allies and supporters. Reporters called out questions, but I didn't answer them. I just walked to Clara's car with my head high, feeling lighter than I had in years. "It's over," Clara said, as we drove away. "No," I corrected her, watching the courthouse disappear in the side mirror. "It's just beginning." 2 weeks later, I returned to the courtroom for sentencing. This time, I'd been asked if I wanted to deliver a victim impact statement. I'd spent days writing and rewriting it, trying to find the right words to express what had been done to me. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the case, and it had become a symbol of elder abuse awareness. Several advocacy groups had reached out to me, asking if I'd be willing to share my story publicly. I hadn't decided yet. Jennifer was sentenced first. Her previous crimes had finally caught up with her, and the judge was merciless. "Miss Jennifer Hayes, I refuse to honor her with the Johns name," the judge said. "You have shown a pattern of predatory behavior that spans decades. You have targeted vulnerable elderly individuals, stolen their assets, and destroyed their lives. This court sentences you to 15 years in state prison without possibility of parole for the first 8 years." Jennifer screamed and had to be restrained by bailiffs as she was led away. I felt nothing watching her go. No satisfaction, no pity, nothing. She was simply being removed from society, like a cancer being cut out. Then it was Marcus's turn. The judge looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Johns, your case is particularly troubling because your victim was your own mother, a woman who by all accounts sacrificed everything to give you opportunities she never had. You didn't just commit fraud, you betrayed a sacred trust." Marcus's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, citing his previously clean record and his cooperation during the investigation. But the prosecutor countered with the recordings, the evidence of planning, the cruelty of the medication scheme. Finally, the judge asked if I wanted to deliver my statement. I stood up, my prepared notes in my hand, and walked to the podium. For a moment, I just looked at Marcus. He finally met my eyes, and I saw tears there. I began reading. "Your Honor, members of the court, I've spent months trying to understand how my son, the boy I raised, the man I thought I knew, could do what he did. I've replayed every moment of his childhood, wondering where I went wrong, what I missed, how I failed to teach him basic human decency." My voice cracked slightly, but I continued. "But I've realized that I didn't fail. I taught him right from wrong. I taught him compassion and integrity. I taught him to value people over money. He simply chose to ignore those lessons. He chose greed over love. He chose a predatory woman over his own mother. Those were his choices, not my failures." I looked directly at Marcus. "You didn't just try to steal my money or my house. You tried to steal my dignity, my autonomy, my very identity. You drugged me to make me seem incompetent. You isolated me from friends and family. You planned to institutionalize me in a facility where I would have been forgotten, and alone, and you did all of this while pretending to care for me, while accepting my gratitude for your help." Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now, but I wasn't finished. "The hardest part isn't the betrayal. It's knowing that you're capable of this level of cruelty. It's knowing that when you looked at me, you didn't see your mother who worked double shifts to pay for your education, or who held you when you were sick, or who believed in you even when you didn't believe in yourself. You saw an obstacle, an inconvenience, a resource to be exploited." I paused, taking a breath. "Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want my son to face consequences for his actions, so that maybe someday he'll understand the magnitude of what he's done. And I want other families to know that elder abuse is real, it's criminal, and it will not be tolerated." I returned to my seat. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of people crying. Not just me, but several jurors, spectators, even one of the court reporters. The judge took a moment before speaking. "Mr. Johns, this court sentences you to 10 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 6 years contingent on completion of a rehabilitation program and full restitution to your mother. Additionally, you are permanently barred from serving as a power of attorney, executor, or financial caretaker for any individual." Marcus was led away without looking back. I watched him go and felt a chapter of my life close forever. He was no longer my son. He was a criminal who happened to share my DNA. I stood on the courthouse steps afterward, surrounded by supporters and reporters. One reporter asked, "Mrs. Johns, do you have any message for other elderly people who might be experiencing similar abuse?" I looked directly into the camera and said, "Don't be silent. Don't be ashamed. This is not your fault. If your family is trying to control your finances, isolate you from friends, or make you feel incompetent, those are warning signs. Document everything. Tell people you trust. Get legal help. You have rights, and you deserve dignity and respect, regardless of your age. No one has the right to steal your life from you, not even your own children." The months after the sentencing were strange and difficult. My house felt both more mine than ever, and somehow emptier. I'd reclaimed every room, changed every lock, removed every trace of Marcus and Jennifer's presence, but I couldn't remove the memories. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Sarah Chen was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that I appreciated. "You're grieving," she told me, in our first session. "You're grieving the son you thought you had, the relationship you thought you'd built, the future you'd imagined. That grief is valid, even though Marcus is still alive." The therapy sessions helped me understand that loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse from them, that setting boundaries isn't cruel, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions. I also began speaking publicly about elder abuse. The advocacy groups that had reached out during the trial helped me craft my story into something that could help others. I spoke at community centers, senior living facilities, and even testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger elder abuse protections. At one speaking engagement, an elderly man approached me afterward. "My daughter has been doing the same thing to me," he said quietly, "taking my Social Security checks, telling me I'm too confused to manage my own money. I thought I was alone. I thought it was my fault." I gave him Patricia's contact information and the numbers for several elder abuse hotlines. "You're not alone," I told him. "And it's not your fault. Get help. Fight back." That moment crystallized why I was doing this work, not for revenge against Marcus, but to prevent what happened to me from happening to others. My relationships deepened with the people who'd stood by me. Clara and I became closer than we'd been since childhood, talking every day, having weekly dinners. David became a constant presence, helping with house repairs, accompanying me to speaking engagements, becoming the family I'd lost when Marcus betrayed me. One afternoon, David and I were sitting on my porch, drinking lemonade and watching the neighborhood kids play in the street. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Turning Marcus in, I mean. He's still your son." I thought about it carefully. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that he made choices that led to this. But no, I don't regret stopping him. If I'd stayed silent, he would have destroyed me, and then he would have moved on to someone else." Jennifer would have found another victim. The abuse would have continued. "You saved yourself," David said. "I did. And maybe I saved whoever Marcus's next victim would have been." I received a letter from Marcus, his first communication since the sentencing. In it, he apologized again, claimed he was getting therapy in prison, said he understood now how wrong he'd been. He asked if I would visit him. I showed the letter to Dr. Chen. "What should I do?" "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe he's really changed, that the son I raised is still in there somewhere. But another part of me thinks this is just another manipulation, that he's trying to work on my emotions." "Both things can be true," Dr. Chen said. "He might genuinely feel remorse and also be trying to manipulate you. The question is, what do you need? Not what he needs, what you need." I thought about it for days. Finally, I wrote back, not a long letter, just a few lines. "Marcus, I'm glad you're getting help. I hope you use this time to truly understand what you did and become a better person. But I'm not ready to see you. And I may never be. I need to protect my own peace now. I hope you can understand that." It was the last communication I had with him. One evening, I stood in my garden, planting new roses to replace the ones that had died during the months when I was too drugged and depressed to care for them. The act of digging in the soil, nurturing new life, felt symbolic. Clara came out to join me. "Those are going to be beautiful," she said. "They will," I agreed. "But even if they're not perfect, even if some don't bloom, they're mine. I planted them. I'm caring for them. That's what matters." A year after the trial, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Thomas, Marcus's godfather, asking if he could visit. When he arrived, he wasn't alone. He brought his elderly mother, Catherine, who I'd known for decades. "Angelina," Catherine said, her voice shaking, "I need your help." "Thomas told me what you went through," Catherine said. "And I realized the same thing is happening to me, but I don't know what to do. He's my son. How do I fight my own child?" I sat with her for hours, sharing my experience, giving her Patricia's contact information, explaining the steps she needed to take. By the end of the conversation, she was crying, but also determined. "Thank you," she said, squeezing my hands. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak out. If you hadn't, I would have stayed silent until it was too late." That conversation led to another case, another investigation, another family confronting the reality of elder abuse. Catherine's son was eventually charged and convicted, and Catherine moved in with Thomas and his wife, safe and protected. My story had rippled outward, creating change beyond my own situation. The state legislature had passed new elder abuse protections, partly inspired by testimony from me and others. Several assisted living facilities had implemented new safeguards. Families were having conversations about financial transparency and respect for elderly relatives. At my book club, which had resumed meeting at my house, we were discussing a novel about family betrayal, and the conversation naturally turned to my experience. "Don't," I told her. "That's what abusers do. They create a narrative that makes their actions seem reasonable." Marcus was convincing because he'd spent his whole life learning how to read people and tell them what they wanted to hear. "You weren't foolish for believing him. You were human." "But I should have checked with you directly," Linda insisted. "Yes," I agreed. "And that's the lesson here. Always go to the source. If someone tells you an elderly person is incompetent or confused, talk to that person yourself. Don't just accept secondhand information, especially when it comes from someone who stands to benefit from that narrative." The conversation became a teaching moment for all of us, discussing how to recognize warning signs, how to support elderly friends and relatives, how to create systems of accountability within families. I'd started volunteering with an elder advocacy organization, using my experience to train social workers and law enforcement on recognizing abuse. During one training session, a young police officer asked, "How do you get victims to come forward when they're ashamed or afraid?" "You don't get them to do anything," I answered. "You create an environment where they feel safe enough to speak up. You believe them when they do. You take their concerns seriously, even if they seem minor, and you make sure they know that abuse is never their fault, no matter what the abuser tells them." I prepared for a major speaking engagement, a national conference on elder abuse, where I'd been invited to give the keynote address. Standing in front of my mirror, practicing my speech, I caught sight of my reflection and barely recognized myself. I looked different than I had a year ago. Stronger, more confident. The fear and confusion that had clouded my eyes during those months of abuse were gone, replaced by something fiercer. I'd survived. More than that, I'd fought back and won. "You're not a victim anymore," I told my reflection. "You're a warrior." The conference hall held over 500 people: social workers, lawyers, doctors, law enforcement officers, and advocates from across the country. As I walked to the podium, I felt the weight of all the stories I'd heard over the past year, all the people who'd reached out to me, all the victims who were still suffering in silence. The room was completely silent as I told my story from beginning to end: the forged documents, the drugging, the isolation, the plan to institutionalize me. But I also talked about the fight back, the allies who helped me, the justice system that worked when I refused to stay silent. "Elder abuse is an epidemic we don't talk about enough," I continued. "It's hidden behind closed doors, buried under shame and family loyalty. Victims don't report it because they're embarrassed, because they love their abusers, because they don't think anyone will believe them, or because they've been convinced they're the problem." I shared statistics. 1 in 10 elderly Americans experiences some form of abuse, but only 1 in 24 cases is reported. Financial abuse alone costs elderly Americans billions of dollars every year. And the abusers are most often family members, the very people who should be protecting their elderly relatives. "But here's what I want you to understand," I said, my voice growing stronger. "We are not helpless. We are not incompetent just because we're old. We have rights, we have agency, and we have the power to fight back. But we can't do it alone. We need systems in place to protect us. We need people who will listen and believe us. We need laws with teeth and enforcement with resources." I outlined specific policy recommendations: mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions when they see suspicious activity in elderly accounts, better training for healthcare providers to recognize signs of abuse, stronger criminal penalties for elder abuse, and more funding for protective services. "But policy isn't enough," I continued. "We need a cultural shift. We need to stop treating elderly people as burdens or obstacles. We need to respect their autonomy and dignity. We need to create communities where abuse can't thrive because everyone is watching out for their elderly neighbors, friends, and relatives." I shared excerpts from letters I'd received, each story illustrating different forms of abuse: financial, physical, emotional, neglect. Each story was heartbreaking, but I emphasized that each one also represented someone who'd found the courage to speak up. "The woman who wrote this letter," I said, holding up one envelope, "reported her daughter for financial abuse 6 months ago. The daughter is now facing criminal charges, and the mother has moved in with her other daughter, who treats her with respect and love. That's not a tragedy, that's a victory." I talked about Catherine and how my story had given her the courage to save herself. I talked about the policy changes that had happened in my state since my case became public. I talked about the families who'd had difficult but necessary conversations about financial transparency and respect. "My son is in prison," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion behind the words. "That's not something I ever wanted or imagined, but I don't regret it, because his imprisonment means other people are safe. It means he learned that actions have consequences. And it means I'm free, truly free, for the first time in years." I paused, looking out at the audience. Some of you work with elderly people every day. Some of you are elderly yourselves. Some of you have parents or grandparents you're worried about. Here's what I want you to take away from my story. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't accept easy explanations or dismiss concerns as paranoia. Ask questions. Document everything, and never ever let shame keep you silent. The speech ended with a call to action. We can end elder abuse, but only if we're willing to talk about it, to confront it, and to support victims when they come forward. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't assume someone else will intervene. Be the person who speaks up, who asks the hard questions, who refuses to look away. Because someday, you might be the elderly person who needs someone to believe you and fight for you. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. People approached me afterward, with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories, thanking me for my courage. A young woman told me she was going to check on her grandmother, who'd been showing signs of financial abuse. A social worker said my speech had given her new tools to recognize and intervene in cases she'd previously missed. But the most meaningful moment came when an elderly man approached me with his adult daughter beside him. "Mrs. Johns," he said, his voice shaking, "6 months ago my son was doing to me what your son did to you. My daughter here heard you speak at a community center and realized what was happening. She helped me get a lawyer and stop him. You saved my life." I hugged them both, crying openly. This was why I'd chosen to speak publicly. Why I'd relived my trauma over and over in front of strangers. Every person I helped made it worthwhile. I returned to my hotel room that night, exhausted but fulfilled. I called Clara to tell her about the speech, about the people I'd met, about the difference I was making. "I'm proud of you," Clara said. "Not just for surviving what Marcus did, but for turning it into something that helps others. That takes real strength." After we hung up, I sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, elderly people were being abused by their families. But somewhere out there, people were also fighting back, speaking up, refusing to be victims. And maybe, just maybe, my story had helped tip the balance toward justice. 6 months after the conference speech, my life had settled into a new normal. I was still doing advocacy work, but I'd learned to balance it with my own needs for peace and privacy. The speaking engagements were less frequent now, focused on events where I felt I could make the most impact. My house felt truly mine again. I'd redecorated several rooms, not to erase memories, but to create new ones. The dining room where the confrontation dinner had happened was now painted a warm yellow, with new curtains and a fresh tablecloth. I hosted my book club there monthly, filling the space with laughter and friendship instead of betrayal. The garden had become my sanctuary. I spent hours there, tending roses and vegetables, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing life. David had helped me build raised beds that were easier on my knees, and Clara had contributed a beautiful stone bench where I could sit and read. One afternoon, I was in the garden when I heard the mailbox close. I walked to the front of the house and found a thick envelope with a prison return address. My heart sank. Another letter from Marcus. But when I opened it, I found something different. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness or a manipulation attempt. It was a genuine, thoughtful letter acknowledging what he'd done without excuses or justifications. "Mom," it began, "I've been in therapy for over a year now, and I'm finally starting to understand the magnitude of what I did to you. Not just the legal crimes, but the moral betrayal. I destroyed the most important relationship in my life because I was weak, greedy, and under the influence of someone who brought out the worst in me. But those aren't excuses, they're explanations. I made choices. I hurt you deliberately. I tried to steal your dignity and autonomy, and I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it." The letter continued, "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I'm not sure I'd believe myself if I were you. I'm writing because my therapist says part of taking responsibility is acknowledging harm without expecting anything in return. So here it is. I harmed you. I betrayed you. I tried to destroy you, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who would never do that again." He described the therapy he was doing, the patterns he was recognizing, the work he was putting in to change. He talked about realizing how Jennifer had manipulated him, but also how he'd been a willing participant because he wanted what she was offering. Easy money, a lifestyle he hadn't earned. "I see now that you raised me better than this," he wrote. "You taught me right from wrong. You modeled integrity and sacrifice and love. I ignored those lessons because they were hard, and taking advantage of you was easy. That's on me, not you. You didn't fail as a mother. I failed as a son." The letter ended. "I heard about your advocacy work. I'm glad you're helping others avoid what I put you through. I'm glad you're using your experience to create change. And I'm glad you're free and safe and living the life you deserve. I don't expect to be part of that life anymore, but I wanted you to know that the son you raised is still in here somewhere, and he's ashamed of what he became. I love you, Mom. I always did. Even when I was hurting you. That doesn't excuse anything. But it's true. Marcus. I sat on my porch for a long time, holding that letter. Dr. Chen had warned me that Marcus might eventually write something like this, and she'd helped me prepare for how I might feel. The question isn't whether his remorse is genuine, she'd said. The question is what you need. Some people find healing in forgiveness and reconciliation. Others find it in maintaining boundaries. Neither is wrong. I thought about the little boy Marcus had been, the teenager who'd made me laugh, the young man I'd been so proud of. I thought about the person who drugged me and planned to institutionalize me. They were the same person, somehow, and I had to find a way to hold both truths. Finally, I wrote back. Not a long letter, but an honest one. Marcus, I received your letter and I appreciate your honesty. I believe you're working on yourself, and I hope you continue that work. But I need you to understand something. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I can forgive you for my own peace, while still maintaining boundaries for my own safety. You hurt me in ways that can't be undone. You broke a trust that can't be repaired. I'm glad you're getting help. I'm glad you're taking responsibility. But I'm not ready to have you in my life, and I may never be. That's not cruelty. It's self-preservation. I hope you can understand that. I hope you can respect it. And I hope you use this experience to become someone who would never hurt anyone this way again. That's the only redemption that matters. I mailed the letter and felt a sense of closure. I hadn't expected. I wasn't holding on to anger anymore, but I also wasn't obligated to forgive in the way Marcus might want. I was choosing my own path forward, and that felt powerful. At book club, we were discussing a novel about family estrangement. The conversation turned personal, as it often did. Susan asked, Angelina, do you think you'll ever see Marcus again? I considered the question carefully. I don't know. Maybe someday, when I'm ready, and if he's truly changed, but I'm not going to force it or rush it. My priority is my own well-being now, and that's okay. Linda nodded. You've taught us all something important, that loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse from them. That's a hard lesson, but a necessary one. Patricia visited, and we had lunch at my house. She'd become more than just my lawyer. She was a friend now. She updated me on several cases she was working on, where my story had helped other victims find the courage to come forward. You've created a ripple effect, Patricia said. Every person you help, every policy change you influence, every speech you give, it all matters. You've turned your trauma into something that protects others. I had good help, I reminded her. I couldn't have done this alone. No one should have to, Patricia agreed. That's the whole point, creating communities and systems where elderly people aren't isolated and vulnerable. You're helping build that. One evening, I stood in my living room, looking at the framed photos on my mantle. Most were old pictures, my late husband, my parents, Marcus as a child. But there were new ones too. Clara and me at the beach last summer, David and me at a fundraiser for the Elder Advocacy Organization, a group photo from my book club. These were my people now, the ones who'd stood by me, who'd helped me fight, who'd celebrated my victory and supported my healing. They were my family, chosen and true. I picked up a small photo of Marcus from his college graduation and looked at it for a long moment. Then I put it in a drawer, not thrown away but not displayed either. He was part of my past, and maybe someday he'd be part of my future. But right now, this moment was mine. I walked to my back door and looked out at my garden, where roses were blooming in the fading light. Tomorrow I'd plant more. Tomorrow I'd water and tend and nurture. Tomorrow I'd continue building the life I deserved. But tonight, I was simply grateful for my strength, for my allies, for my freedom, and for the knowledge that I'd fought back and won. 2 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a legislative hearing about proposed elder abuse reforms. The committee room was formal and intimidating, filled with lawmakers and advocates, but I felt calm as I approached the microphone. I'd prepared remarks, but as I looked at the faces in front of me, some skeptical, some sympathetic, all waiting, I decided to speak from my heart instead. I'm here today not just as a survivor of elder abuse, but as someone who spent the last 2 years learning that my story isn't unique, it's heartbreakingly common. Elderly people all across this country are being financially exploited, physically harmed, emotionally manipulated, and systematically isolated by the very people who should be protecting them. I shared statistics, but I also shared stories, the letters I'd received, the people I'd met, the cases I'd learned about through my advocacy work. I made the issue personal and immediate, showing the lawmakers that these weren't just numbers, but real people with real lives being destroyed. The reforms you're considering today, mandatory reporting, stronger penalties, better protective services, these aren't just policy proposals, they're lifelines. They're the difference between victims staying silent and finding the courage to speak up. They're the difference between abusers getting away with crimes and facing consequences. I described what it felt like to be drugged in my own home, to watch my son plan my institutionalization, to realize that the person I'd sacrificed everything for was willing to destroy me for money. But I was lucky, I said. I had resources, a sister who believed me, a lawyer who took my case, friends who stood by me, and the mental clarity to recognize what was happening before it was too late. Not everyone has those advantages. I urged the committee to think about the elderly people who didn't have my resources, who were isolated without family support, who didn't know their rights or how to access help. These reforms you're considering could save their lives. Please, don't let political considerations or budget concerns stop you from doing what's right. The testimony seemed to resonate. Several committee members asked thoughtful questions, and afterward the chairwoman approached me personally. Mrs. Johns, your testimony was powerful. I promise you we're taking this seriously. 3 months later, the reforms passed. They weren't perfect, but they were a significant step forward. Increased funding for protective services, mandatory training for healthcare providers, stronger criminal penalties, and better coordination between agencies. I attended the bill signing ceremony, standing with other advocates and survivors who'd fought for these changes. The governor mentioned my case specifically in his remarks. Angelina Johns turned her personal tragedy into a catalyst for change. Because of her courage in speaking out, countless elderly people in our state will have better protection and more resources. That's the power of one person refusing to stay silent. My advocacy work had become a central part of my identity, but I'd also learned to balance it with joy and rest. I traveled more now, visiting Clara's children and grandchildren in California, taking a cruise with my book club friends, even going to Europe with David, something I'd always dreamed of but never done. David and I had become even closer over the years. Our relationship had evolved from friendship into something deeper, though we both approached it carefully given our ages and histories. One evening, sitting on my porch watching the sunset, he asked, Angelina, have you ever thought about what comes next? Not with advocacy or speaking, but with your life. I knew what he was really asking. I think about it, I admitted. I think about what it means to build a new life at 74, to find happiness after everything that happened. It's strange, isn't it? I spent so much of my life focused on Marcus, on being a mother, on sacrifice. Now I have the freedom to focus on myself, and sometimes I'm not sure what that means. It means whatever you want it to mean, David said gently. That's the whole point of freedom. We sat in comfortable silence, and I realized he was right. I could choose what came next. I could choose happiness, companionship, adventure, or quiet contentment. The choice was mine. I received a call from a woman named Helen, who'd heard me speak at a church event. She was 81, recently widowed, and her adult children were pressuring her to sell her house and move into assisted living against her wishes. I don't need assisted living, Helen said, her voice shaking with frustration. I'm perfectly capable of living independently, but they keep telling me I'm being stubborn and difficult. They say they're worried about me, but I think they just want access to the money from selling my house. I spent an hour on the phone with her, asking questions, helping her identify red flags, giving her resources and contact information. Helen, I said finally, you have the right to make your own decisions about where you live and how you spend your money. Your children's worry doesn't override your autonomy. If you feel like something isn't right, trust that instinct. A month later, Helen called back. She'd consulted with a lawyer, discovered her children had been planning to use power of attorney to force the sale, and had taken steps to protect herself. "I'm staying in my house," she said triumphantly. "And my children are angry, but I don't care. This is my life, and I get to decide how to live it." That conversation reminded me why I continued doing this work. Every person I helped, every life I touched, made the pain of my own experience worthwhile. I was sorting through old boxes in my attic and found Marcus's baby clothes, his school papers, photos from his childhood. Instead of pain, I felt a bittersweet nostalgia. Those memories were real, even if the person he'd become had betrayed them. I decided to keep some items and donate others. I wasn't erasing Marcus from my history, but I wasn't letting that history define my present either. He was part of my story, but he wasn't the whole story. That evening, I wrote in my journal something Dr. Chen had encouraged me to do throughout this journey. I wrote about the girl I'd been, the woman I'd become, the mother I'd tried to be, and the survivor I'd had to become. I wrote about loss and betrayal, but also about strength and resilience, and the unexpected joys of rebuilding. "I'm 74 years old," I wrote, "and I'm finally learning to live for myself. Not for my son, not for anyone else's expectations, but for me. That's not selfish. It's necessary, and it's beautiful." I hosted a dinner party. Not the confrontational dinner of 2 years ago, but a celebration. My dining room was filled with the people who mattered. Clara and her family, David, my book club friends, Patricia, Dr. Chen, Thomas, and Catherine, and several other survivors I'd met through my advocacy work. We ate and laughed and shared stories. At one point, Clara raised her glass. "To Angelina, a survivor, an advocate, and the strongest person I know." Everyone joined in the toast, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude, not for what I'd been through, but for what I'd become because of it. I'd turned pain into purpose, betrayal into advocacy, and victimhood into victory. As I looked around the table at these faces, some familiar, some new, all dear to me, I realized this was my legacy. Not the house or the money Marcus had tried to steal, but the lives I'd touched, the changes I'd helped create, the community I'd built. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me, for standing with me, for helping me find my strength. I couldn't have done any of this alone." "You were never alone," Clara said softly. "You just didn't know it yet." And she was right. Even in my darkest moments, when I'd felt most isolated and afraid, I'd had people who cared. I just needed to find the courage to reach out to them. The dinner ended late, with hugs and promises to gather again soon. After everyone left, I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Marcus had announced he was taking control of my finances, where I dropped that teacup in shock and horror. But that moment didn't define this space anymore. New memories had replaced it. Better memories filled with love and laughter and chosen family. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs to bed, feeling peaceful and content. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, new chances to live fully and freely. But tonight I was simply grateful to be here, in my home, living the life I'd fought so hard to reclaim. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your presence here, listening to my story, means more than you know. If my experience has touched you in any way, if it's made you think about your own family, your own elderly relatives, or if it's given you courage to speak up about abuse you're experiencing, please don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to let me know you're here. Subscribe so you can hear more stories like mine. And most importantly, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and how this story has affected you. I read every single comment, and your words give me strength to continue this work. Together, we can end elder abuse. Together, we can make sure no one else has to fight this battle alone. Thank you for being part of my journey. Thank you for caring. And if you or someone you love is experiencing elder abuse, please reach out for help. You deserve dignity, respect, and freedom, no matter your age. Don't let shame or fear keep you silent. Speak up. Fight back. You're stronger than you know.